The patrol corridor flickered as if the universe itself had blinked, and the human warrior decided this was not the moment to complain. His suit argued with him in 3 languages and 1 experimental dialect, while the ship's AI suggested breathing exercises and a cheerful apology to fate. He ignored both and followed the sound of weapons fire through a breach that should not have existed, because ignoring sensible advice had carried him this far. When the smoke thinned, he found her standing where an enemy should have been, perfectly steady, long ears angled back, as if listening to arguments reality was trying to hide. She looked at him like a calculation that refused to balance. He looked at her like someone who had just saved the wrong person and knew it. Their first conversation was interrupted by a gravity lurch that pinned them to the deck. She laughed once, sharp and surprised, and asked if humans always greeted strangers by collapsing spacetime. He said only on holidays. When the surge passed, she did not run. She watched him disable a drone with a maneuver that was illegal in 3 systems and frowned upon in 5. She said her people would call that reckless. He said his people called it Tuesday and asked if her people had better names for it. She said they had longer ones. They moved together through corridors that rearranged themselves out of spite, the station confused by conflicting royal and mercenary codes. She complained about the temperature, the lighting, and the absurdity of dying in a place that smelled like overheated circuitry. He complained about nothing, which she found suspicious and therefore amusing. When a turret emerged from the ceiling and misidentified both of them as ceremonial furniture, she kicked it until it apologized. The warrior laughed despite himself, the sound echoing like a rule being broken. By the time they reached the hangar, alarms were singing in harmonic disapproval. A royal cruiser loomed beyond the bay, its insignia glowing with authority and unfortunate timing. She froze, ears lifting, an old future trying to snap back into place. He expected her to step away. Instead, she stepped closer, close enough that his suit raised an unauthorized proximity alert and suggested romance protocols. He muted it and promised later violence. She said her name carried a destiny she had never ordered. She said returning meant silence shaped like honor. He said he was a soldier with a ship that barely worked and a life held together by maintenance tape and bad jokes. She smiled at that, small and dangerous. When the cruiser hailed them, she answered before he could object, voice steady, amused, defiant. She said she would not be coming back. Somewhere, ancient systems woke up angry and confused. In the hangar, the human warrior realized the universe had made him relevant, and he was already tired. The floor lights pulsed as if applauding a bad decision. Security fields shimmered and failed, embarrassed by the confidence in her refusal. The AI whispered that odds of survival had dropped to a comforting single digit. He thanked it for honesty. She asked if it always sounded smug. The AI denied smugness and recommended snacks. They ran anyway, because standing still invited philosophy. Royal guards arrived with polished weapons and rehearsed expressions. One tripped over a cable and blamed destiny. Another announced protocol and forgot the next line. She corrected him out of habit and then laughed at herself for it. The warrior fired a grappler, missed, and claimed it was a distraction. It worked, mostly. They slid behind a cargo pallet labeled fragile ideas and argued briefly about directions. She chose left. He trusted ears that could hear the future complaining. A broadcast cut through the bay, layered with authority and static. It reminded her of vows, of bloodlines measured in light years, of a throne that preferred obedience to oxygen. She replied with a question about whether a kingdom could survive without choice. The channel went silent, which felt like an answer trying to be dignified. The AI logged the moment as historically inconvenient. They reached his ship, which greeted him with a warning about overdue maintenance and a joke he had not programmed. She paused at the ramp. For a heartbeat, the universe held its breath. Then she crossed it, and alarms across the sector reclassified themselves. He sealed the hatch, strapped in, and asked if she was certain. She said certainty was overrated, but curiosity was not. The engines coughed, then laughed, then burned. As they lifted, the cruiser hesitated, as if the past itself had lost the script. The human warrior set a course he would later regret fondly. Beside him, the alien woman adjusted the seat, ears relaxed, and asked what came next. He said probably trouble. She said finally. The jump corridor opened like a dare. Systems complained, recalculated, then complained about recalculating. He counted down out of habit. She counted up just to see what would happen. Somewhere behind them, traditions cracked with a sound too small for ceremonies. Ahead, space waited without an opinion. The ship leapt, laughing at physics, and the first chapter of their mistake became impossible to take back. The AI asked if it should notify anyone. He said no. She said yes, but only the stars. The AI compromised by humming. She closed her eyes and listened, ears catching echoes of a kingdom rearranging its math. He adjusted power, felt the familiar thrill of surviving another wrong turn. Humor lingered like a bruise that knew it would heal. Choice, once made, refused to sit quietly. The ship carried them forward, carrying consequences with the grace of something that had never learned to apologize. Time stretched, then snapped back. Warnings settled into grumbles. She asked if humans always improvised their legends. He said legends were just paperwork that learned to brag. She laughed, softer now, and the sound felt like a system rebooting. Far away, councils would argue. Closer still, nothing argued at all. The ship flew on, stubborn and alive, toward a future that had misplaced its rules. He let the silence exist. She let it change her. Between them, no throne fit. The jump ended with a shudder and a view that promised neither mercy nor boredom. He smiled despite himself. She opened her eyes. Somewhere, a legacy noticed the absence and panicked. The ship drifted. The moment held. And neither of them apologized for choosing it. Outside, stars did not care. Inside, something had begun. That was enough for now, or it would have been if the universe ever agreed. It did not even close, and that was the problem. And the promise, both at once. Always, forever probably, or until maintenance, whichever came first. It usually did, he sighed, she grinned, the ship flew, history frowned, choice smiled, endings waited, beginnings too, somewhere ahead, always still. Moving on now here, end fin. The jump ended badly, which meant it ended normally. Systems argued about coordinates while the ship insisted it had arrived exactly where it meant to, even if nowhere nearby agreed. The human warrior unstrapped, floated briefly, then landed harder than dignity preferred. The AI announced that local physics were suggestive rather than mandatory and asked if anyone felt nauseous. She said no. He said yes, but emotionally. The ship stabilized out of spite and drifted into a region officially classified as empty, which experience suggested was optimistic. She took the silence first. She said her people would already be counting consequences. He said his people would be counting fuel. Both were correct. A message blinked into existence, layered with encryption and outrage, and then multiplied as if the kingdom could not decide which tone to scold them with. The AI filtered them into a neat stack labeled royal displeasure and suggested postponing guilt until after lunch. She laughed, then stopped, then laughed again, as if testing whether laughter still belonged to her. The first interception came from a council drone that introduced itself with a title longer than the ship. It demanded her return, cited tradition, destiny, and a footnote from a treaty no one remembered signing. She asked if destiny always traveled alone or if it had friends. The drone paused, recalculated, and accused her of philosophical misconduct. The warrior leaned back and offered it a seat. It declined on principle and exploded quietly after colliding with an uncooperative probability wave. The AI logged the incident as diplomatic. They did not argue about what came next. They argued about snacks. He offered compressed ration bars. She inspected one, scanned it, and asked why humans weaponized disappointment. He said it built character. She ate it anyway and declared character overrated. As they moved deeper, the ship picked up echoes of pursuit, signatures layered with authority and offense. Somewhere, councils debated whether love constituted treason or merely poor planning. Somewhere else, an ancient algorithm adjusted lines of succession and disliked the new math. When the first royal cruiser caught up, it did not fire. It broadcast. It spoke of duty with practiced sadness, of legacy as if it were a living thing that needed protection from choice. She replied without anger. She said legacy that could not survive a decision was already fragile. The channel filled with murmurs, some shocked, some relieved, one definitely bored. The warrior muted the rest and focused on flying badly enough to confuse prediction engines. The ship applauded the effort by not falling apart. A smaller craft detached, piloted by someone she recognized. A friend, once. The voice came through strained but warm, asking if she was safe, if the human was kind, if rebellion felt different than stories promised. She said she was safe. She said kindness was irregular but sincere. She said rebellion mostly felt like paperwork chasing you through space. The friend laughed and said councils were panicking. The transmission ended before goodbyes became permanent. They hid briefly in the shadow of a fractured moon that argued with gravity. There, she finally hesitated. She said she had broken something old. He said old things broke all the time and called it progress. She said some breaks did not heal. He said some did not need to. Humor stretched thin but held. The AI suggested naming the moment for future historians. They ignored it. A new signal arrived, older than anger, colder than protocol. An automated system, awakened by her refusal, announced succession instability and corrective measures. It spoke without emotion and therefore with cruelty. The warrior swore. She smiled, tired but bright, and said at least the kingdom was honest now. They accelerated, alarms stacking like complaints. The ship complained last. As they fled, she taught him a word from her language that meant choosing without permission. It sounded like laughter and defiance sharing a breath. He tried to say it and failed. She corrected him patiently, which felt dangerous. Behind them, space folded with displeasure. Ahead, unknown vectors waited, unconcerned. The second chapter of their mistake unfolded, messier, louder, harder to joke through. Yet they did. Because fear traveled lighter when mocked. The AI announced dwindling options and improving morale. The warrior asked if that was normal. The AI said no, but found it refreshing. She leaned back, ears low, listening to futures colliding. She said whatever happened, she would not step back across that ramp. He said he believed her. The ship jumped again, not away but forward into consequences still writing themselves. Somewhere a throne felt lighter. Somewhere else nothing cared. The universe adjusted its grip, and they kept going. The last jump resolved into silence that felt earned. Systems steadied without complaint, as if even the ship understood this was not the moment for drama. The human warrior sat still longer than necessary, hands resting where panic used to live. The AI reported that pursuit signals had faded into argument and then into resignation. Councils were still debating. Algorithms were still angry. No one, however, was catching up. She noticed the quiet first and smiled like someone discovering a room she owned. She said it seemed the universe had finally decided to wait its turn. The message arrived without escort or threat. The ancient system spoke plainly now, stripped of ceremony. It acknowledged instability, admitted miscalculation, and proposed revision. Legacy, it said, was adaptable when survival required imagination. She listened without interruption. When it finished, she asked if adaptation included letting her choose. The pause was long enough to be historical. Then the system agreed and quietly powered down protocols that had ruled longer than memory. Somewhere a throne stopped expecting her. Somewhere else an air breathed easier. The warrior exhaled, surprised by the weight leaving him. He realized he was no longer reacting, no longer running. He was choosing routes instead of escapes. She noticed that too and teased him gently, saying rebellion had improved his posture. He said love had improved his aim. The AI requested permission to log that as character development. They allowed it once. A final transmission came from her friend, casual now, almost cheerful. The councils had fractured but not fallen. Traditions were being rewritten by committees that complained loudly and worked slowly. The kingdom would survive awkwardly like all honest things. Her friend asked if she would ever return. She said maybe, someday, on her own terms. The answer felt like a gift given without obligation. The channel closed with laughter instead of mourning. They set a course not toward hiding, but toward building something smaller and truer. The ship suggested upgrades. He agreed. She suggested names for places they had not yet seen. He listened. He realized growth had arrived quietly, disguised as trust. He was no longer the soldier who followed noise. He was someone who stayed. As they drifted, humor returned fully unforced. The AI complained about boredom. She taught it a joke from her language that made no sense and therefore worked. He learned the word for belonging and pronounced it correctly this time. Outside, stars continued their indifference. Inside, consequences settled into shape. When they finally powered down to rest, no alarms protested. No destiny knocked. Choice sat between them, unguarded and ordinary. That was the victory. Somewhere far away, history adjusted footnotes and pretended it had planned this all along. The ship floated, stubborn and alive. The warrior closed his eyes without fear. She stayed awake a little longer, listening to a future that no longer argued. Then she rested too. The universe moved on, slightly altered and did not apologize. Neither did they.